You won't believe what happened when a female CEO laughed at her black driver, but then he proved her wrong in the most epic way. The private jet's engines wound down as Victoria Steele stepped onto the tarmac, her Louboutin heels clicking against the concrete with the precision of a metronome. At 42, she commanded a business empire worth $3 billion, her name whispered in boardrooms from Manhattan to Singapore. The morning sun caught the diamonds on her wrist, a Patek Philippe that cost more than most people's homes. She was untouchable, unstoppable, and she knew it. But success had carved something cold from Victoria's heart. The woman who once served tables to pay for business school had forgotten the weight of struggle, the taste of rejection, the humility that built her empire brick by brick. Now she moved through the world like a blade, sharp, gleaming, and cutting down anyone who dared stand in her way. Her assistant, Marcus, hurried beside her, tablet in hand, rattling off the day's schedule. The Summit International Conference begins in 2 hours. Your presentation on the billion-dollar partnership with the Asian-European Consortium is at. Where's Davidson? Victoria interrupted, scanning the empty arrival area. Her regular chauffeur's black Mercedes was nowhere in sight. Marcus cleared his throat nervously. He called in sick this morning. The agency sent a replacement. He should be. A modest sedan pulled up, not the gleaming Mercedes she expected, but a clean, well-maintained vehicle. The driver stepped out and Victoria's expression hardened. Malik Johnson was a tall, dignified black man in his early 50s, wearing a crisp chauffeur's uniform. His movements were precise, respectful, but there was something in his eyes, a depth that suggested stories untold. This is what they sent me? Victoria's voice dripped with disdain. I specifically requested Davidson or someone of his caliber. Malik approached with quiet professionalism, opening the rear door. Good morning, Miss Steele. I'm Malik. I'll be your driver today. Victoria slid into the back seat, her nose wrinkling as if the very air had been contaminated. Marcus, remind me to find a new agency. This is completely unacceptable. As the car pulled away from the private airport, Victoria's eyes found Malik's in the rearview mirror. What she saw there was calm, patient, almost serene, and it irritated her beyond measure. How dare he look so composed when she was clearly displeased? So, driver, she began, her tone sharp as winter glass, how long have you been doing this work? Several years, ma'am, Malik replied, his voice steady and respectful. Several years, she repeated mockingly. And before that? Let me guess, security? Construction? Something manual? In the mirror, Malik's eyes never wavered. I've had various positions, ma'am. Victoria leaned forward, her predatory instincts fully awakened. Various positions. How wonderfully vague. Tell me, did you finish high school? College seems unlikely, but I try not to make assumptions. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in the passenger seat, shooting apologetic glances at the rearview mirror. But Victoria was just getting started. The accent, she continued, savoring each word like a fine wine. Very urban. I suppose proper English wasn't emphasized wherever you're from. I speak clearly enough to be understood, ma'am, Malik replied, his grip on the steering wheel steady, professional. Oh, you speak clearly, Victoria laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Right away, ma'am. Very articulate indeed. The sedan moved smoothly through the city streets, but the atmosphere inside had turned toxic. Victoria stared at the back of Malik's head, seeing not a human being but a target for her frustrations. The morning stress, the pressure of the billion-dollar deal, the constant need to prove herself in a world that questioned every move she made, all of it crystallized into contempt for the quiet man behind the wheel. What Victoria couldn't see, what her arrogance blinded her to, was the way Malik's hands remained steady despite her cruelty. The way his breathing stayed controlled even as her words cut deep. Most telling of all, she missed the flash of recognition in the eyes of a passing businessman who glimpsed Malik through the window and nodded respectfully. The drive to the international summit should have taken 90 minutes, but the afternoon held promises of both revelation and retribution that would change everything. 20 minutes into the journey, Victoria's phone buzzed with the aggressive tone she reserved for only the most important calls. The name on the screen made her straighten. James Morrison, CEO of Morrison Dynamics, her biggest rival and reluctant partner in today's deal. James, she answered, her voice immediately shifting to its business tone, commanding, sharp, utterly confident. Victoria, darling, came the sardonic reply. I trust you're en route to witness your empire expand by another billion? More than expand, she purred, settling back into the leather seat. Today we become untouchable in the Asian markets. The consortium is practically begging to sign with us. She glanced at Malik in the rearview mirror and felt a wicked impulse rise within her. James Morrison had always prided himself on his sophistication, his worldliness. What would he think of her current situation? "James, you wouldn't believe the comedy of errors this morning," she began, her voice rising just loud enough to ensure Malik heard every word. "My regular driver called in sick and the agency sent me." She paused for dramatic effect, her eyes locked on the mirror. "Well, let's just say they sent someone who looks like he should be cleaning the streets, not driving a CEO." Marcus winced visibly, but Victoria was enjoying herself too much to stop. "I mean really," she continued, her laughter echoing through the car, "I ask for professional service, and they send me someone who probably can't even spell professional. The accent alone is enough to make me want to roll up the partition." In the rearview mirror, she watched Malik's eyes. They didn't flinch, didn't narrow with anger or humiliation. They remained steady, almost understanding. The lack of reaction only fueled her cruelty. "Oh, Victoria," James chuckled on the other end, "your standards are impossibly high. I'm sure he's perfectly adequate for driving from point A to point B." "Adequate," she repeated, savoring the word. "Yes, I suppose that's all some people can aspire to be." She raised her voice slightly. "Isn't that right, driver? Adequate is enough for some of us." "Yes, ma'am," came Malik's quiet reply. Victoria's smile was razor-sharp. "See what I mean, James?" "Yes, ma'am." "No, ma'am." The vocabulary of the unambitious. What Victoria failed to notice in her moment of triumph was the slight change in Malik's route. Traffic ahead had grown heavy, and with the expertise of someone intimately familiar with the city's rhythm, he had taken a side street that would save them 15 minutes. She was too busy reveling in her superiority to recognize the local knowledge and quick thinking that would ensure she arrived on time for the most important meeting of her career. Marcus tried to catch her attention, gesturing toward the window to point out the efficient detour, but Victoria waved him off. She was in full predatory mode, and nothing would stop her from savoring this moment of absolute power over someone she deemed beneath her. "James, I have to go," she said, ending the call. But the cruelty wasn't finished with her yet. It never was, not when she felt this alive, this powerful, this utterly in control. "Driver," she called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed instantly. "This isn't the route to the Summit Center." "No, ma'am," Malik replied calmly. "There's heavy construction on the main route. This way will save us about 15 minutes. Victoria's eyes flashed with indignation. "I didn't ask for your opinion on the best route. I know this city better than someone like you ever could. Take the main roads." "Ma'am, with respect, the traffic reports show." "With respect." Victoria's voice rose to a near shriek. "Don't you dare lecture me about respect. You work for me today, which means you follow my instructions without question. Do you understand me?" In the mirror, those steady eyes met hers once more. "I understand, ma'am." "Good," she snapped. "And in the future, remember your place. I don't need advice from someone whose biggest decision each day is probably what color uniform to wear." The car turned back toward the main route, and almost immediately, they hit the wall of traffic that Malik had been trying to avoid. Brake lights stretched ahead like a river of red, and Victoria felt her first flutter of anxiety about the timing of her arrival. But even as the minutes ticked by and her stress levels rose, she couldn't bring herself to admit that her driver, this man she'd spent the last hour belittling, had been trying to help her. Pride was a drug, and Victoria Steele was completely addicted. As they sat in the gridlocked traffic, she caught Malik checking his watch and adjusting the air conditioning without being asked, ensuring her comfort even after her cruelty. The gesture should have shamed her. Instead, it only reinforced her belief in her own superiority. After all, she thought, why else would he be so eager to please if he didn't know exactly where he belonged in the hierarchy of the world? She had no idea that in less than an hour, that hierarchy would crumble around her like a house of cards, and the man she'd spent the morning humiliating would become the architect of her greatest lesson in humility. The Summit International Conference Center rose before them like a glass and steel monument to global commerce. Luxury vehicles lined the circular drive, Bentleys, Maseratis, Rolls-Royces, each one disgorging immaculately dressed executives, translators, and international delegates. The air hummed with a dozen languages as billion-dollar deals took shape in whispered conversations. Victoria emerged from the car with renewed confidence, her earlier traffic frustrations forgotten in the face of her magnificent stage. This was her element: power, prestige, and the intoxicating scent of money changing hands. She smoothed her designer suit and prepared to command the room as she always did. Malik moved around the car with quiet efficiency, opening doors, retrieving her briefcase, his movements precise and professional. Several people in the crowd glanced his way, some with what appeared to be recognition, others with respectful nods. But Victoria, adjusting her jewelry and scanning the crowd for important faces, missed these subtle exchanges entirely. "Miss Steele." A voice called out in accented English. Dr. Yamamoto from the Tokyo Consortium approached with a warm smile and a small bow. "We are so pleased you could join us today." "The pleasure is entirely mine, Dr. Yamamoto," Victoria replied, slipping seamlessly into her business persona. "I trust your flight from Tokyo was comfortable?" As they exchanged pleasantries, she noticed Dr. Yamamoto's eyes drift toward Malik, who was quietly organizing her materials. The Japanese executive's expression seemed to shift. Was that surprise? Recognition? Before she could analyze it further, another delegate approached. "Miss Steele, bonjour," said a distinguished Frenchman with silver hair. "I am Philippe Dubois from the European Division. We have been looking forward to your presentation." More handshakes, more smiles, more of the careful diplomatic dance that preceded every major international deal. But again Victoria caught these fleeting glances toward Malik. A woman from the German delegation actually smiled and nodded at him. An elderly man from what appeared to be an Arabic delegation paused as if he wanted to speak to Malik directly. "Marcus," Victoria whispered to her assistant, "what's with all the attention on the driver?" Marcus shrugged, equally puzzled. "Perhaps they're just being polite?" Dr. Yamamoto turned back to their conversation, but not before Victoria caught him saying something in rapid Japanese to a colleague while looking in Malik's direction. The colleague's eyebrows rose in what was unmistakably surprise. "Is everything all right, Dr. Yamamoto?" Victoria asked, her business instincts suddenly alert to undercurrents she couldn't quite understand. "Oh yes, of course," he replied quickly. "I was just, commenting on the beautiful weather we are having today." But his eyes drifted once more toward Malik, who was now standing quietly by the car, hands folded, the picture of professional discretion. There was something in Dr. Yamamoto's expression, respect? Admiration? It made no sense. Victoria felt a strange flutter of unease, like a shadow passing over her confidence. These were some of the most sophisticated business people in the world, representatives of corporations worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Why would any of them spare a second glance for a hired driver? As they walked toward the conference center's imposing entrance, she overheard a fragment of conversation between two Arabic-speaking delegates. They were speaking rapidly, but she caught them both looking toward Malik with what appeared to be recognition. "Excuse me," she interrupted Philippe Dubois mid-sentence, "but do you happen to know my driver?" Philippe looked genuinely confused. "Your driver, madam?" "The gentleman by the car," she said, gesturing toward Malik. Several people seemed to recognize him. Philippe glanced over and for just a moment his expression changed. "Ah," he said carefully, "perhaps they are simply appreciating professional service when they see it." But there was something in his tone, something that didn't quite ring true. Victoria's unease deepened. She was a woman who had built her empire on reading people, on catching the subtle tells that revealed what others were really thinking. And right now, everyone seemed to be holding back something significant. As they entered the magnificent lobby of the conference center, with its soaring ceiling and walls lined with flags from dozens of nations, Victoria caught one more exchange that stopped her cold. An elderly Japanese woman, clearly someone of importance based on the deference shown to her by others, approached Dr. Yamamoto. She spoke quickly in Japanese, but Victoria caught one word that she recognized: translator. Dr. Yamamoto responded with something that sounded apologetic, and both of them glanced toward the entrance where Malik was just finishing with the car. Victoria's mind raced. Translator? Why would they be discussing translators while looking at her driver? It made no sense unless. But no, that was impossible. The agencies didn't make mistakes that significant. As they entered the magnificent lobby of the conference center, with its soaring ceiling and walls lined with flags from dozens of nations, Victoria caught one more exchange that stopped her cold. An elderly Japanese woman, clearly someone of importance based on the deference shown to her by others, approached Dr. Yamamoto. She spoke quickly in Japanese, but Victoria caught one word that she recognized: translator. Dr. Yamamoto responded with something that sounded apologetic, and both of them glanced toward the entrance where Malik was just finishing with the car. Victoria's mind raced. Translator? Why would they be discussing translators while looking at her driver? It made no sense unless. But no, That was impossible. The agencies didn't make mistakes that significant. Malik was exactly what he appeared to be, a replacement driver, nothing more. Her earlier assessment had been correct, and any suggestion otherwise was simply her imagination running wild under the stress of the day's importance. Still, as she walked toward the elevator that would take her to the conference hall where her billion-dollar presentation awaited, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something crucial. Something that everyone else in the lobby seemed to understand except her. The elevator doors closed with a soft whisper, carrying her toward what she believed would be her greatest triumph. She had no idea she was ascending toward the most humbling experience of her life, and that the quiet man she'd spent the morning belittling held the key to everything she thought she wanted. The conference hall was a masterpiece of international diplomacy, its circular design ensuring that no delegation felt more important than another. Flags from 37 nations hung from the ceiling, while simultaneous translation booths lined the upper level like glass boxes containing the voices that would bridge language barriers. Victoria took her place at the head table, her presentation materials arranged with military precision. Around her sat the titans of international commerce. Dr. Yamamoto representing the Asian Consortium, Philippe Dubois for the European markets, Fatima Al-Rashid from the Middle Eastern Division, and a dozen others whose combined wealth could reshape entire economies. The billion-dollar partnership agreement lay before them, a document that would give Victoria's company unprecedented access to global markets while providing her partners with the American distribution networks they desperately needed. It was the deal of a lifetime, the culmination of 2 years of careful negotiation. Ladies and gentlemen, the conference moderator announced, we will begin with Ms. Steele's presentation on the proposed partnership structure. Victoria rose, her confidence fully restored in this familiar environment. She commanded boardrooms the way generals commanded armies, and this would be no different. The next hour would secure her legacy and add another billion to her empire's value. She began her presentation with the polished perfection of someone who had never known failure. Charts and graphs painted a picture of mutual prosperity, market expansion, and profits that would benefit every party involved. The delegates listened intently, occasionally taking notes or whispering to their translators. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Then Dr. Yamamoto raised his hand. Miss Steele, he said, his accent more pronounced than usual, there is a section here about distribution territories in Southeast Asia. The translation we received is somewhat unclear about the exclusivity arrangements. Victoria glanced at her materials. The section was clearly written in straightforward English. I'm not sure I understand the confusion, Dr. Yamamoto. The language seems quite explicit to me. Perhaps, interjected Fatima Al-Rashid, but in Arabic the implications are different. What reads as partnership in English could be interpreted as dependency in our language. This could be problematic for our stakeholders. Philippe Dubois nodded gravely. I must agree. The French translation also raises concerns about the profit-sharing arrangements. There appear to be nuances that are lost in translation. Victoria felt the first flutter of panic. Surely our translation teams can clarify any minor linguistic discrepancies? But as she looked around the room, she saw confusion spreading like a virus. The simultaneous translators in their booths were speaking rapidly into their microphones, but instead of clarity, their efforts seemed to be creating more chaos. Dr. Yamamoto was now engaged in rapid Japanese with his team, their voices rising with obvious frustration. The Arabic delegation huddled together, pointing at specific clauses with increasing agitation. The Europeans exchanged worried glances as their translator threw up his hands in apparent defeat. Ladies and gentlemen, the moderator called out, perhaps we could take a brief recess to resolve these translation issues? But 20 minutes later, the situation had only worsened. The professional translators, each expert in their respective languages, seemed unable to bridge the gap between legal terminology, cultural implications, and business intentions. What had started as minor clarifications had exploded into fundamental disagreements about the very nature of the partnership. This is completely unacceptable, Dr. Yamamoto declared, his usual diplomatic composure cracking. The Japanese version suggests we would have limited autonomy in our own markets. The Arabic translation implies we would be junior partners in a deal we were told would be equitable. Fatima Al-Rashid added, her voice sharp with indignation. Victoria watched in horror as 2 years of careful negotiation began to unravel before her eyes. The billion-dollar deal was dissolving into a Tower of Babel, with each delegation retreating into their own linguistic corners, convinced that the others were trying to deceive them. Someone fix this, she shouted, her professional composure finally cracking. These are minor translation issues. The deal is solid. Someone needs to explain this properly before we lose everything." The room fell silent except for the frustrated muttering of the translators, who had given up trying to untangle the linguistic knots that threatened to strangle the entire agreement. Victoria looked around desperately, her empire's future hanging in the balance. She needed someone who could speak all these languages fluently, someone who understood not just the words but the cultural context that gave them meaning. Someone who could save everything she had worked for. That's when she saw him. Malik stood quietly at the back of the room, having entered with a coffee service that no one had bothered to acknowledge in the chaos. He was holding a silver tray, his expression calm and attentive, watching the dissolution of international diplomacy with the same steady gaze she had seen in the rearview mirror all morning. For a moment that stretched like eternity, their eyes met across the room. And in that instant, Victoria Steele realized that the man she had spent the morning humiliating might be the only person who could save her from the greatest professional disaster of her life. The room teetered on the edge of complete collapse when Malik set down his coffee tray and stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said quietly, his voice carrying clearly through the frustrated murmurs of 37 delegates. Every head turned toward him, this man in a driver's uniform who had dared to interrupt a billion-dollar negotiation. Victoria's eyes widened in horror. What could he possibly be thinking? "Dr. Yamamoto-san," Malik continued, and suddenly his voice was different, fluid, respectful, carrying the precise tonal qualities of native Japanese. "Anata jie shinpai shite iru tenwa, kyaku no daraten ken and I kensuru dokusenteki kenri no koto disu eni?" The effect was electric. Dr. Yamamoto's jaw dropped, and he responded immediately in rapid Japanese, his relief obvious even to those who couldn't understand the words. But Malik wasn't finished. He turned to Fatima al-Rashid and seamlessly shifted into flawless Arabic, his pronunciation so perfect it carried the authority of someone who had lived the language. "Sayyidati al-Rashid, al-mushkila haya ana at-tarjama tushawihumana asharaka al-mutakafaye. Hal turadina and yuwadaha hadihi and nukta?" Fatima's eyes grew wide with astonishment as she found herself responding in Arabic, the tension in her voice immediately dissipating as Malik nodded with understanding. The room had gone completely silent. Even the professional translators in their booths had stopped working, staring down at this impossible scene unfolding below them. Philippe Dubois leaned forward in his chair, and Malik turned to him with a slight bow. "Monsieur Dubois," he said in French so elegant it could have come from the Académie Française. "La confusion vient du fait que les termes juridiques anglais n'y correspondent pas exactement aux concepts d'affaires français. Puis-je suggérer une reformulation que respecterait les nuances culturelles?" Philippe could only nod, speechless with amazement. For the next hour, Malik moved through the room like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of languages. He spoke Japanese with the formal respect that Dr. Yamamoto's position demanded. His Arabic carried the poetic flourishes that transformed mere business terms into expressions of mutual honor. His French flowed with the logical precision that Philippe's European sensibilities required. But it wasn't just translation, it was cultural bridge building at the highest level. When the Japanese delegation expressed concern about face saving in their markets, Malik explained it to the Arabic speakers not as pride, but as the respect for community harmony that their own culture valued. When the Europeans worried about legal precedents, he conveyed their concerns to the Asians not as distrust, but as the careful attention to detail that would protect everyone's interests. One by one, the misunderstandings dissolved. The exclusivity arrangements were clarified in ways that honored each culture's approach to partnership. The profit-sharing structure was explained with nuances that satisfied everyone's concept of fairness. The implementation timeline was adjusted to respect different cultural approaches to business relationships. Victoria watched in stunned silence as her billion-dollar deal was not just saved, but elevated. Malik's multilingual diplomacy had transformed a near disaster into something approaching artistry. The delegates weren't just signing a contract, they were building a foundation of mutual respect that would sustain their partnership for years to come. When the final signatures were placed on the agreement, the room erupted in applause. Not the polite applause of business obligation, but the genuine appreciation of people who had witnessed something extraordinary. Dr. Yamamoto rose from his chair and approached Malik with a deep bow. "Domo arigato gozaimashita," he said with profound respect. "Anata no tasukjie nakatara, kono kyaku wa daimon nat ita daho." Fatima al-Rashid joined them, her hand over her heart in a gesture of sincere gratitude. "Shukran jazilan," she said in Arabic. "You have saved not just a business deal but the respect between our peoples." Philippe Dubois was the last to approach, and his words carried the weight of European formality. Monsieur, your skill transcends mere translation. You have demonstrated the highest form of diplomatic art. Through it all, Malik remained calm, gracious, humble. I was simply doing what needed to be done, he said quietly. Communication is a bridge, and bridges serve everyone who crosses them. Only then did Victoria realize that every eye in the room had turned to her. The delegates who had been praising Malik were now looking at her with expressions she couldn't quite read. There was something in their faces, disappointment? Disapproval? She cleared her throat, trying to regain some semblance of control over the situation. Well, she said, her voice unnaturally bright, I'm grateful that our driver was able to assist with the minor translation difficulties. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Yamamoto was the first to speak, his voice carefully controlled. Miss Steele, this gentleman is far more than a driver. His linguistic abilities and cultural understanding are extraordinary. How fortunate you are to have such talent in your employ. But there was something in his tone that suggested he knew exactly how she had treated that talent, and his opinion of her had shifted dramatically. As the delegates began to file out of the conference room, Victoria found herself standing alone in her moment of supposed triumph, watching the man she had spent the morning humiliating receive the respect and gratitude that should have been directed toward her. The victory was hers, but somehow, it felt like the most devastating defeat of her life. The hotel's grand lobby buzzed with the satisfied conversations of delegates whose billion-dollar dreams had been transformed into reality. Groups clustered around marble columns and leather seating areas, their animated discussions punctuated by laughter and the clinking of champagne glasses from the impromptu celebration. But Victoria Steele stood apart from it all, her mind reeling as fragments of conversations drifted toward her like accusations carried on the wind. Absolutely remarkable linguistic abilities. The cultural sensitivity he demonstrated saved the entire negotiation. She watched as Dr. Yamamoto approached Malik near the concierge desk, engaging him in what appeared to be a lengthy conversation in Japanese. The respect in the elderly executive's posture was unmistakable. The slight bow, the attentive listening, the genuine smile that spread across his face as Malik responded. Philippe Dubois joined them, and the conversation seamlessly shifted to French. Victoria could see Malik's hand gestures becoming more expressive, more European, as he adapted not just his language but his entire communication style to match his audience. The French executive was nodding enthusiastically, occasionally interjecting with what sounded like questions or observations. When Fatima al-Rashid approached the group, the entire dynamic shifted again. Malik turned to her with the formal courtesy that Arabic culture demanded, and their conversation took on the rhythmic, almost musical quality of his native fluency in her language. Fatima's bodyguard, who had been stone-faced throughout the entire conference, was actually smiling. Ma'am, Marcus appeared at Victoria's elbow, his voice uncertain. The delegates are asking if you'd like to join them for dinner. They're particularly interested in discussing Mr. Johnson's background. Mr. Johnson. They were calling him Mr. Victoria felt something cold settle in her stomach. His background? She asked, though she dreaded the answer. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. It seems several of them recognize him. Dr. Yamamoto mentioned something about the United Nations. And Ms. al-Rashid asked if he was the same translator who worked on the Syrian peace accords 3 years ago. The United Nations. Syrian peace accords. The words hit Victoria like physical blows. She looked across the lobby with new eyes, seeing not a simple driver who had gotten lucky with languages, but a man whose reputation apparently preceded him in the highest levels of international diplomacy. There's more, Marcus continued reluctantly. Philippe Dubois says he remembers him from the European Union's Cultural Integration Summit. And there's a German delegate who swears he's the same person who helped negotiate the refugee resettlement agreements in Berlin. Victoria's legs felt weak. That's impossible. He's a driver. The agency sent him as a replacement driver. But even as she said the words, she knew how hollow they sounded. No replacement driver spoke 5 languages with native fluency. No replacement driver commanded the immediate respect of international business leaders. No replacement driver could save a billion-dollar deal with the casual expertise she had just witnessed. Ma'am, Marcus said gently, I think there's been a misunderstanding about Mr. Johnson's qualifications. Across the lobby, she watched as a hotel manager approached Malik with obvious deference, engaging him in what appeared to be Italian. Even the hotel staff recognized something about him that she had been too blinded by prejudice to see. The realization hit her with the force of a physical assault. She had spent the entire morning humiliating a man whose professional accomplishments likely dwarfed her own. Every snide comment about his education, every sneer about his capabilities, every assumption about his background had been not just wrong, but spectacularly, embarrassingly wrong. "Miss Steele?" Dr. Yamamoto appeared beside her, his expression polite but noticeably cooler than it had been that morning. "We were hoping you might join us for dinner. And perhaps you could tell us more about how you came to work with such a distinguished translator." The question was asked with diplomatic courtesy, but Victoria caught the undertone. He knew. They all knew. Somehow, word had spread about how she had treated Malik, and these sophisticated international executives had drawn their own conclusions about her character. She began, then found she had no words. What could she possibly say? That she had mistaken one of the world's most accomplished linguists for an uneducated driver? That she had spent the morning belittling a man who had helped negotiate international peace agreements? "Perhaps another time," she managed weakly. "I have some urgent business to attend to." Dr. Yamamoto nodded with the kind of polite understanding that carried layers of judgment. "Of course. Please give our regards to Mr. Johnson. His assistance today was invaluable." As the Japanese executive walked away to rejoin the celebration Victoria was no longer welcome to attend, she realized that her greatest professional triumph had become her most complete personal humiliation. The billion-dollar deal was signed, but she had lost something far more valuable in the process: the respect of her peers and any claim to moral authority she might have once possessed. The hotel lobby had transformed into her courtroom, and she had been found guilty by a jury of the world's most sophisticated minds. The verdict was clear in their polite distance, their careful courtesy, their obvious preference for Malik's company over her own. She looked toward the concierge desk where Malik was still surrounded by admirers, and felt the weight of a morning's worth of cruelty settling on her shoulders like a stone. The reckoning she had never seen coming had arrived, and it wore the face of quiet dignity and multilingual grace. The elevator ride to the parking garage felt like a descent into purgatory. Victoria's reflection in the polished steel doors showed her a woman whose carefully constructed facade was beginning to crack. Her makeup remained perfect, her designer suit still immaculate, but her eyes held the hollow look of someone who had just discovered that their entire self-perception was built on lies. The parking garage was dimly lit and nearly empty, the concrete echoing with the distant hum of the city above. She found Malik by the sedan, methodically cleaning the interior with the same quiet precision he had brought to everything else that day. His movements were unhurried, almost meditative, as if he found peace in even the most mundane tasks. Victoria approached slowly, her heels clicking against the concrete in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown to judgment. With each step, the weight of the day's revelations pressed down harder on her shoulders. "Malik," she called out, her voice smaller than she had ever heard it. He looked up from his work, those same steady eyes that had watched her cruelty in the rearview mirror now holding something different. Not anger, not resentment, but a kind of patient sadness that cut deeper than any accusation could have. "Yes, ma'am?" The formal address that had once fed her sense of superiority now felt like an indictment. She moved closer, her hands trembling slightly as she struggled to find words that could somehow bridge the chasm her behavior had created. "I owe you an apology," she began, but the words felt inadequate even as she spoke them. "I treated you terribly today. I said things that were unforgivable." Malik set down his cleaning cloth and straightened, giving her his full attention. In the dim garage lighting, his dignity seemed to shine even brighter. "I was wrong about everything," Victoria continued, her voice growing stronger with the relief of finally speaking truth. "About who you are, about what you're capable of, about—" She gestured helplessly. "About everything. You saved my deal today. You saved my company. And I spent the morning treating you like someone beneath you," Malik finished quietly without accusation. The simple honesty of his words broke something open in Victoria's chest. "Yes," she whispered. "Like someone beneath me. When the truth is you're—" She struggled for words that could encompass what she had learned. "You're extraordinary. Your accomplishments, your abilities, the respect those delegates showed you, I've never seen anything like it." Malik listened without interruption, his expression neither harsh nor forgiving, simply present. "Can you tell me?" Victoria asked, her curiosity now tinged with genuine respect. "About your background? About who you really are?" For a moment, Malik was silent, as if deciding whether she had earned the right to know. Then he spoke, his voice carrying the quiet authority of lived experience. "I spent 15 years with the United Nations," he said simply. Diplomatic translation, cultural mediation, peace negotiations. I've worked in 43 countries, learned 17 languages, helped draft treaties that prevented wars and agreements that fed hungry children. Victoria felt each word like a physical blow to her assumptions. 3 years ago I retired, he continued. I'd seen enough of the world's important people in their important rooms making their important decisions. I wanted to understand what life looked like from different angles, so I started driving. Not because I had to, but because I chose to. There's dignity in all honest work, and wisdom to be found in every perspective. The rebuke was gentle but devastating. While she had been measuring worth by titles and bank accounts, he had been seeking understanding through service. Today was supposed to be my last day, Malik said, and Victoria felt her heart skip. I've been accepted to teach at the International Relations Institute. I start next week. Your last day, she repeated, the irony not lost on her. Of all the days for the universe to teach her this lesson, it had chosen the very last opportunity she would have had to learn it. I'm sorry, Victoria said again, but this time the words carried the weight of genuine transformation. Not just for today but for the person I've become. Success changed me into someone I don't recognize, someone who could look at a person like you and see only... She shook her head. I don't know how to be better, but I want to try. Malik studied her face in the dim light, searching for sincerity. What he found there seemed to satisfy him. Miss Steele, he said gently, the languages I speak aren't just words and grammar. They're entire ways of seeing the world. Japanese teaches patience and respect for harmony. Arabic shows the beauty in hospitality and honor. French reveals the precision of thought and the importance of cultural refinement. He paused, letting the lesson settle. But there's one language that transcends all others, one that every human being understands regardless of their education or background or circumstances. What language is that? Victoria asked, though she suspected she already knew. Respect, Malik said simply. It costs nothing to give, but its value is immeasurable. It builds bridges where walls once stood. It turns enemies into allies and strangers into friends. Most importantly, it reflects not on the person who receives it, but on the character of the person who offers it. The words hung in the air between them like a benediction. Victoria felt tears she didn't know she was capable of shedding beginning to blur her vision. I forgot how to speak that language, she admitted. Success made me fluent in cruelty instead. Languages can be relearned, Malik said with the first genuine warmth she had heard from him all day. But only by those humble enough to admit they need the lesson. He extended his hand, not in subservience, but in the gesture of one equal offering respect to another. Victoria took it, feeling the calluses that spoke of a lifetime of honest work, the steadiness that had remained constant through her morning of attacks. Thank you, she said, and for the first time in years she meant it completely. Malik nodded, then moved to open the car door for her one final time. But as he did, he added quietly, the most successful people I've known aren't those who accumulate the most, but those who lift up the most. Perhaps that's a language worth learning fluently. As Victoria settled into the back seat for the last time, she realized that the most valuable education of her life had come not from Harvard Business School, but from a man in a driver's uniform who had taught her that true sophistication was measured not by what languages you spoke, but by how you chose to speak to others. The sedan pulled out of the garage and into the evening traffic, carrying with it the seeds of what Victoria hoped might become her redemption. 6 months later, Victoria Steele stood in the lobby of her corporate headquarters, watching workers install a new piece of art on the main wall. The bronze plaque was simple, elegant, bearing words that had become the foundation of her company's new culture initiative. Respect speaks every language. Success is measured not by what we accumulate, but by whom we lift up. M. Johnson, Cultural Ambassador. The transformation hadn't been easy. Changing the culture of a $3 billion company required more than inspirational quotes and good intentions. It demanded concrete actions, difficult conversations, and the humbling work of examining every policy, every hiring practice, every assumption that had previously gone unquestioned. Victoria had started with herself. She enrolled in sensitivity training, not the corporate-mandated kind, but real, challenging workshops that forced her to confront the unconscious biases that had shaped her worldview. She learned about microaggressions, about the subtle ways privilege could blind someone to others' experiences, about the difference between intent and impact. The diversity and inclusion program she launched wasn't window dressing. It was fundamental restructuring. The company now actively recruited from historically black colleges and universities, partnered with immigrant professional organizations, and created mentorship programs that paired senior executives with employees from underrepresented backgrounds. But the most meaningful change was personal. Victoria had reached out to Malik through the International Relations Institute, asking if he would consider serving as a cultural consultant for her company. Their monthly meetings had become the highlight of her professional life, not just for the wisdom he shared about cross-cultural communication, but for the ongoing masterclass in dignity and grace he provided simply by being himself. Miss Steele? Her assistant, no longer Marcus, who had found the company's new direction incompatible with his own values, approached with that day's schedule. "Your 2 o'clock is here for the interview." Victoria nodded, straightening her shoulders. The candidate was a recent immigrant from Somalia, a woman with an engineering degree from her home country and dreams of building bridges, literally and figuratively, in her new nation. 2 years ago, Victoria might have dismissed her credentials or questioned her accent. Today, she was eager to learn what unique perspectives and skills this brilliant woman might bring to their team. As she walked toward the conference room, Victoria passed a group of employees engaged in animated conversation in 3 different languages. Her company's new policy encouraged multilingual communication, recognizing it as an asset rather than a barrier. The sound of diverse voices working together had become the soundtrack of her corporate transformation. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Yamamoto. "Congratulations on the Forbes recognition for corporate leadership. Well-deserved acknowledgement of your company's evolution." The Forbes article had been titled "From Profit to Purpose: How One CEO's Humbling Experience Transformed a Corporate Giant." Victoria had been reluctant to do the interview, uncomfortable with being praised for learning lessons she should have known all along. But Malik had encouraged her to share the story, arguing that vulnerability in leadership could inspire others to examine their own blind spots. The article had generated thousands of responses from executives around the world, many sharing their own moments of reckoning, their own journeys from arrogance to understanding. It had sparked a movement of sorts, a recognition that true leadership required not just business acumen, but emotional intelligence and cultural humility. As Victoria entered the conference room to meet her Somali engineer, she caught her reflection in the window. The woman looking back at her had the same face, the same designer suit, the same trappings of success. But the eyes were different, softer, more curious, more open to the possibility that every person she met might have something valuable to teach her. The morning that had begun with her humiliating a quiet driver had become the foundation of the most meaningful chapter of her professional life. She had learned that respect was indeed a universal language, one that opened doors she never knew existed and built bridges to places she never imagined she could go. In the end, the billion-dollar deal she signed that day had been among the least valuable things she gained. The real treasure had been the lesson in seeing others clearly, speaking their language of dignity, and discovering that true success wasn't about rising above others, but about lifting them up alongside you. As she extended her hand to welcome her newest team member, Victoria silently thanked the man who had taught her that the most important language to master wasn't found in any textbook. It was written in the way we choose to treat one another, one conversation at a time. And if this story of transformation and redemption resonated with you, if it reminded you of the power we all have to choose respect over arrogance, understanding over assumption, let me know in the comments below. Where are you watching from? What language of respect will you choose to speak today? Because in a world that often rewards the loudest voice, sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is listen. Sometimes the greatest success comes not from accumulating more, but from acknowledging that we still have everything to learn. Don't forget to like this video if it moved you, subscribe for more stories that challenge us to be better, and share it with someone who might need to remember that respect truly does speak every language.